Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the internet. We're going to take a look at the invisible engine that powers, well, pretty much everything you do online. We're talking about the back end.
Think about the last time you bought something online. You find the thing you want, you hit that Buy Now button, and poof, a few days later, it's on your doorstep. But what actually happens in that split second after you click? That right there is where our story begins.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the big idea of the invisible engine. Then we'll break down the difference between the front end and the back end. We'll follow a real shopper's journey to see it all in action, check out the tools of the trade, and finally, we'll talk about the people who build all this stuff, the architects of the unseen.
Okay, let's dive in. Picture your favorite app or website. You know, the parts you see and touch? Well, there's this whole other universe humming along behind it that you never interact with directly. It's kind of like the engine room of a massive ship. You don't see the gears turning, but without them, that ship isn't going anywhere.
Now, to really wrap our heads around the back end, let's use a simple analogy. Think of a big retail store. You've got the shiny storefront out front where customers browse, and then you have the huge, busy warehouse in the back where all the real work gets done. This is pretty much the perfect way to think about how websites are built. So on one side you have the front end. This is our storefront. It's everything you actually see and interact with, the slick design, the cool animations, the buttons you click. It's built with languages like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But then you've got the back end. That's the warehouse and the entire operations center. This is where the heavy lifting happens. We're talking about the servers, the databases, the security, all the critical stuff that makes the whole business actually function.
But here's the most important part. That shiny storefront is totally useless without the warehouse. I mean, you can't sell things that aren't in stock, right? Front-end and back-end developers have to work in perfect sync. They are constantly talking, collaborating, and making sure the entire experience, from what you see to what you don't, is seamless.
Okay, now that we have this idea of the storefront and the warehouse, let's see how they actually play together. We're going to follow a shopper on a typical digital journey and watch the back end do its thing in real time. First up, you search for a product. That search isn't just happening on your screen. Nope, your request zips off to a back-end server, which then has to dive into a massive database and find exactly what you're looking for. Okay, next you decide to log in. The back-end takes over, checking your username and password to make sure you are who you say you are. And finally, the big moment, the purchase. All of your sensitive credit card info is handled by the back end, which processes the payment and keeps your data locked down tight. It's literally a digital vault.
So how on earth do developers build these incredibly complex systems? Well, it's not magic, it's engineering. They have a whole toolkit of specialized languages, frameworks, and a super important concept called an API. And this brings us to a really crucial question. When you do something on the website, our storefront, how does the massive back-end server, our warehouse, know exactly what to do with your request?
Well, the answer starts with something called an API, or Application Programming Interface. The best way to think about it is like a waiter at a restaurant. You don't just walk into the kitchen and start shouting your order at the chef, right? Of course not. You give your order to the waiter, who knows the exact language and process to communicate it to the kitchen. The front end uses an API as its waiter to talk to the back end in a clear, structured way. Okay, so once our waiter, the API, has a request, it needs directions. That's where a route comes in. A route is like a specific street address. It tells the API exactly which part of the warehouse or server needs to handle this particular request. And finally, we get to the endpoint. If the route is the street address, the endpoint is the actual door you need to knock on. It's the final destination where the work gets done. And what happens if the route leads to an address with no door? Well, that's when you get that infamous 404 error. It's the server basically saying, hey, I went to that address, but there's nothing here.
Now, to build all this, developers use some really powerful programming languages. For a long time, JavaScript was just for the front-end storefront. But now, thanks to tools like Node.js, it's a powerhouse in the back-end warehouse too. Another huge one is Python, which developers love because it's so flexible and generally easier to read and learn.
And of course, none of this works without data. That's why back-end developers absolutely have to be masters of SQL. You can think of SQL as the universal language spoken by all databases. It's how you ask for information. They also use these really cool tools called ORMs, which act like expert translators, helping their application code talk to the database without needing to write tons and tons of raw SQL.
So, who are these people doing all this incredible, complex work behind the scenes? Well, they are the back-end developers.
They really are the brilliant, unseen architects of our digital lives.
And this quote just nails it. It's not some boring job where you're just typing code in a dark room. Being a back-end developer means you're constantly solving new puzzles. The tech is always changing, the challenges are always new, and that's what makes it so rewarding.
So when you boil it all down, what does a back-end developer actually do all day? Well, they're in charge of the servers, they build and maintain those critical APIs we talked about, they handle your logins, and most importantly, they are the guardians of your data. They make sure everything is stored and transferred securely. They really are the unsung heroes of the internet.
So the next time you're streaming a movie, or scrolling your social feed, or even just checking your bank balance online, take a second. Think about all those invisible systems, those hidden engines working tirelessly behind the scenes just to make it happen. It makes you wonder, right? What other invisible systems are powering your day?